I moved into the apartment on the 6th floor of a building in a small town in Oregon. It was an old place, but it was quiet, and I needed a fresh start. I was 28, living alone for the first time. I'd just gotten a new job, and everything seemed like it was going in the right direction. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right with the building. It started out small. The first few days, I didn't even think about the camera I'd installed at the door. It was just a simple thing, something to help me keep track of deliveries or, at least, tell me when the mailman was coming. I never thought I'd need it for anything else. At first, it was just the usual. Packages arrived, kids ran through the hallways, the neighbor's dog barked outside now and then. Nothing strange. But then, one evening, I got a notification on my phone. Motion detected at front door. I thought it was just another delivery. I opened the app and looked at the live feed. What I saw made my blood run cold. There was a man standing at my door. He wasn't knocking, wasn't ringing the bell. He was just standing there, staring at the door. His face was pale, his eyes wide and unblinking. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears as I stared at the screen. His stillness was unnatural, almost too deliberate. I felt a wave of dread hit me, but I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe he was lost. Maybe he was drunk. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. Nothing. No one was there. I figured it was nothing, just some random person who'd gotten confused. But then it happened again. The next night, the same thing. The same man. Standing there. Staring. This time, I didn't ignore it. I called the building manager and explained the situation. He promised to have someone look into it. I even called the cops. But when they arrived, there was no sign of the man. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. The whole thing felt unreal, like I was losing my mind. I kept thinking, maybe I'm just seeing things. But then, the following night, it happened again. This time, I saw something that made my stomach turn. I was sitting on the couch when my phone buzzed with another notification. Motion detected. I looked at the screen, and there he was. The man. But this time, he wasn't just standing still. He was watching. His eyes locked onto the camera, like he knew I was watching him. I froze. My mind raced. What the hell was going on? I tried calling the building manager again. I tried calling the cops. But no one came. No one could catch him. And I was starting to feel like I was going insane. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came a few days later. I woke up to the sound of something scraping against the wall. I thought it was just the building settling, but the sound kept going. It was coming closer. Closer. My heart pounded as I slowly, carefully got out of bed and crept toward the door. I pressed my ear against it, listening. There was no sound now. Nothing but the soft hum of the city in the distance. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Nothing. No one. Just the empty stretch of carpeted floor and the dim light from the stairwell. But when I turned back to my apartment, my stomach dropped. The window was open. I was sure I'd closed it before bed. My mind raced as I stepped inside, my eyes scanning the room. The silence was suffocating. And then I saw him. He was standing by the window, just standing there. His face turned slowly toward me, a twisted smile stretching across his lips. "You shouldn't have left the window open," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "I've been watching you for a long time." I stumbled backward, my legs shaking, my breath coming in short gasps. I couldn't move, couldn't think. He just kept smiling, his eyes glinting in the dim light. The fear coursing through me was overwhelming. "I want to marry you," he said, his voice still eerily calm. "I've been waiting for you to notice me." I don't even remember running. I don't remember how I made it to the door, but somehow, I was out of the apartment and on the fire escape, gasping for air. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I heard him behind me. The soft sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, getting closer. I didn't stop running. I didn't stop until I was on the ground, my body aching from the fall. I don't even know how I got away, but I did. I ran. And I didn't stop running. I called the cops from the street, my voice trembling as I gave them my address. They showed up, but the man was gone. No sign of him. No trace. They searched the building, but he had vanished. They said they'd keep an eye out for him, but it was like he'd never been there at all. It's been months since that night. I moved out of the apartment, packed up my things, and left. I moved to a different town, hoping I'd find some peace. But I can't escape the feeling that he's still out there, somewhere. I was young back then, just 8 years old, and it was summer. My mom, dad, and I lived in a quiet little neighborhood on the outskirts of Asheville. It was the kind of place where nothing ever really happened. The houses were spaced out just enough to give you a sense of privacy, and everyone pretty much minded their own business. The kind of place where you'd hear crickets at night and maybe the distant bark of a dog. That's it. But the silence would never feel the same again after what happened. It started with the first break-in. I remember it clearly. One Saturday afternoon, Mom decided we needed to go out to the store. It was just a normal errand, nothing special. We came back, bags full of groceries, chatting about whatever was on the radio. But as soon as we stepped onto the porch, I could feel it. Something wasn't right. The front door was ajar. "Did we leave that open?" Dad asked, voice low, his eyes squinting. I shook my head. "No," I whispered, feeling a chill creep down my spine. Dad's hand was already on the door handle, and when he pushed it open, the house smelled different. Like something was off. The furniture was all out of place, couch cushions on the floor, chairs knocked over. I felt a cold rush of air, like someone had been standing there, waiting. "Call the police," Dad ordered, voice tight. But the strangest part? The intruder had left. There was no sign of anyone, just signs of a rush, someone who wanted to get in and out fast. We didn't even find anything missing, which only made it worse. It was like they were looking for something, but couldn't find it. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing every creak of the house. I thought about the way the door had swung open, the way the air felt so heavy. But I thought maybe it was just me being paranoid. I was a kid, after all. Things like this didn't happen where I lived. But the second break-in, this one, I will never forget. It was around 2 in the morning. My mom had woken up suddenly, her eyes wide, her breath shallow. I woke up too, feeling a cold sweat run down my neck. I could hear it. The softest sound. A creak of floorboards, light but deliberate, like someone was walking on tiptoe through the house. My mom froze, her hand clutching the blanket, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to scream but couldn't. I don't think I breathed for what felt like hours. The only thing I could hear was the slow, steady footsteps moving closer. Each step was louder, but still soft. Like the person was trying to be quiet, but couldn't quite manage it. And then, there he was. I didn't see his face, not at first. I only saw the outline of a man standing in the doorway of my mom and dad's room. He was tall, and his silhouette was strange, twisted, almost. He didn't say anything. Just stood there, watching us. My mom didn't move. She was paralyzed, staring at him like she'd seen a ghost. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come. My throat felt like it was filled with cement. The man stayed there for what felt like forever. The air was thick with the weight of his presence. I could feel his eyes on me, but I couldn't look away from my mom. She was trembling, her eyes wide in fear, but still, she didn't speak. Then, like a nightmare, he stepped back and disappeared into the shadows of the hallway. It wasn't until the man was gone that my mom could move. She scrambled out of bed and rushed to the phone, calling the police. I could hear her voice shaking as she explained what had happened, but the words didn't make sense to me. How could someone just stand there and do nothing? How could they leave without a sound? The police came shortly after, but there was nothing they could do. They found footprints in the dust, strange smudges on the walls, and fingerprints on the windows. But they couldn't find the man. Not a trace. Mom was a wreck after that. She couldn't sleep, and neither could I. But it wasn't just the fear that haunted her. There was something else, something that I didn't understand back then. It wasn't until later, when I was old enough to piece everything together, that I found out about the man who'd come into our house. It wasn't just some random criminal. No, this man had been obsessed with something strange. You see, my grandfather, Mom's father, had heard of a man who was put away in a mental hospital years before. A man who'd had an unhealthy obsession with Alice in Wonderland. Not just the book, but the story. He believed it was real. He thought the world was a twisted version of Wonderland, and that the Queen of Hearts had given him a mission. At first, I thought my grandfather was just rambling, but then I realized something. The man who had broken into our house wasn't just a thief. No. He had been following us, studying us. And when he came into our home, it was like he was trying to find something. Some clue. Something he thought he was supposed to do. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what they found later. It was the milk. You see, the police didn't just find those strange marks on the windows or the footprints on the floor. They found something in the kitchen. A bottle of milk. Or what was left of it. It had been tampered with. Someone had poured bleach into it. But that wasn't all. My mother's cat, Toby, was acting strange after that night. He wouldn't drink from the bowl anymore, no matter how much we tried to coax him. It wasn't until later we discovered that the man had also taken something from the fridge. A piece of raw meat. He'd stolen it and eaten it. But it wasn't just any meat. It was steak, a nice cut. And in the midst of all this chaos, that detail, the stolen meat, the strange behavior, seemed the most haunting. I don't know why he did it, or what he wanted, but I know one thing, he was watching us, and we had no idea. The only clue we had was his obsession with that damn story. Alice in Wonderland. The book, the symbols, the madness. And that's what frightened me the most, the thought that this man, whoever he was, might be out there still. It started off like any other night. I was sitting on the porch, beer in hand, watching the stars above the quiet farm. It had been 5 years since we moved out to this place, a small house far from the town, surrounded by fields and trees. At first, the girls hated it. Too quiet. Too isolated. But over time, they started to come around. Bethany, my older daughter, got into hiking and birdwatching. Kindle, well, she'd sit for hours on the porch swing, lost in her thoughts. The night was chilly, a crisp fall wind tugging at the leaves. The world felt still, almost too still. Then I heard it. A sound, distant, strange. It wasn't the usual rustling of trees or the whistle of the wind. It was a thud, then a scrape. I thought maybe it was a branch falling or some animal roaming around. I didn't think much of it at first, just got up, checked the yard. Nothing. Just the emptiness of the night. I shrugged it off and went back to my beer, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. But the sound came again, louder this time. A scrape, like something dragging along the ground, followed by a sharp crack. My skin prickled, and I stood up faster this time. I walked around the house, flashlight in hand, scanning the yard. I didn't see anything. Not a damn thing. Just shadows. Just the wind playing tricks on me, I thought. But over the next few nights, it happened again. Each time, the noise seemed to come closer. There was no denying it now. Someone, or something, was out there. But who would be so far out in the woods at this hour? We hadn't had trouble with anyone since we moved here. No neighbors, no strangers. Just us and the farm animals. I tried to reassure myself. It had to be an animal. A deer, maybe, or a raccoon. But then, one night, something happened that changed everything. It was a little after midnight when I heard it, this time, the scream. A blood-curdling scream from inside the house. Kindle. I rushed up the stairs, heart pounding, but as I reached her room, she was standing by the window, trembling, her face pale as a sheet. She pointed, her fingers shaking, toward the dark expanse outside. "There's someone out there," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I tried to see, but all I could make out were the dark shapes of trees in the distance, nothing more. I pulled her away from the window. "It's nothing, sweetie. It's probably just a deer or something. Go back to bed." But I couldn't shake the feeling in my gut. Something wasn't right. The next day, I set up a couple of security cameras around the house. It was just a precaution. Maybe it would put my mind at ease. But as the days passed, I started to notice something. The cameras picked up movement at night, flickers of shadows, figures in the dark. I couldn't make out the details, but it was enough to make my stomach churn. One evening, after seeing the strange footage again, I decided I couldn't sit idly by anymore. I was going to check things out. I grabbed my flashlight and a crowbar, thinking it was time to get to the bottom of this. But when I went to the barn, I froze. My truck, the one I'd parked in the driveway, was being messed with. There was someone out there, and they were trying to get into my truck. I didn't hesitate. I ran back inside, told the girls to hide in the barn, and dialed the cops. My heart raced as I grabbed a shovel, the only weapon I could find in the moment, and sprinted toward the truck. My hands were shaking, but I couldn't show fear. Not now. I had to protect my family. As I crept around the side of the truck, I saw him, an older man, wearing a torn jacket, his hair wild and dirty. He was messing with the door, trying to get inside. I raised the shovel, my grip tight on the handle. I was ready. I called out to him. "Hey! Get away from my truck!" The man froze for a second, his head snapping in my direction. There was something in his eyes, something hollow, like he wasn't fully there. Then, without warning, he rushed at me. I swung the shovel, catching him in the shoulder. He stumbled back, cursing under his breath. "I'm not gonna let you hurt my family," I shouted, swinging again. This time, I hit him square in the chest, and he crumpled to the ground, unconscious. I didn't waste any time. I ran back to the barn, yelling for the girls to stay hidden, to stay down. I waited. The sirens were distant at first, but they grew louder. The cops arrived, and within minutes they had the man in cuffs, dragging him away from the scene. After the police left, I sat down with the girls in the living room, trying to make sense of it all. Who was that man? What the hell was he doing on our property? The cops told me something that sent a chill down my spine. He had escaped from a nearby mental hospital. They didn't know why he'd come out here, but it was clear he had been planning something. The cops said they couldn't understand his motive, but I knew. He wasn't just looking for something to steal. He had been watching us, studying us, for weeks. I felt the weight of it. He was after us. I didn't know what he wanted, but I knew it wasn't good. And I was damn sure he'd had every intention of killing us that night. I looked at my daughters, who were now quiet, staring into space. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with fear. "Daddy, do you think he was going to hurt us?" Kendall whispered. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know, sweetheart. But I'm not going to let anything happen to you. I promise." The house, which had once felt like a peaceful refuge, now seemed like a prison. I couldn't stop thinking about that man. I couldn't stop thinking about how close we had come to losing everything. The quiet night outside wasn't so peaceful anymore. The world had changed in an instant. I woke up in the middle of the night, my eyes snapping open as I heard it, a faint, scraping sound coming from downstairs. My heart skipped. For a moment, I thought it might just be the fridge, or the pipes, or some broken appliance making a noise. But then I heard it again. The sound of something heavy dragging across the floor, slow and deliberate. My blood went cold. That wasn't a broken appliance. I listened carefully. The house was still, but the dragging sound continued. It was coming from the kitchen. My breath hitched as I swung my legs off the bed and stood, trying not to make a sound. The floorboards creaked under my feet as I moved quietly toward the door of my bedroom. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat so loud I thought it might give me away. I slowly opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The house felt unnaturally silent now, the only sound my breathing and the distant creak of wood. I didn't know what I expected to find, but the dragging noise had stopped. For a moment I thought maybe it was just my imagination, playing tricks on me in the dead of night. Then I heard it, footsteps. Soft. Slow. But unmistakable. Someone was downstairs. Someone was moving around my house. My skin crawled. Panic set in, but I tried to stay calm. I reached for my phone, but it wasn't in my pocket. I cursed under my breath and began creeping down the stairs, trying not to make a sound. The house felt endless in the dark. Each step down felt like it took me further away from safety. I reached the bottom of the stairs and stood in the darkness, listening. I couldn't see anything, but the air felt wrong, heavy, like something was lurking just beyond the light. Then I saw him. A man, crouched on the kitchen floor, dragging a large butcher's knife across the tiles. He wasn't moving like a normal person. He was crawling on all fours, his eyes wide, frantic. His mouth was slightly open, and in it, he gripped the blade. The sound of the metal scraping against the floor sent chills up my spine. I froze. For what felt like an eternity, neither of us moved. I thought about running, but my feet felt glued to the floor. The man's eyes locked onto mine, and for a split second, I saw something flicker in his gaze. Hunger? Madness? Then, without warning, he lunged at me. I barely had time to react before he was on top of me, his hands gripping my arms with terrifying strength. His breath was hot and erratic against my skin. I tried to scream, but his hand shot up, slapping over my mouth, muffling any noise. I struggled, kicking and flailing, trying to break free, but he was relentless. His breath came in sharp bursts, his body pressing down on me with all its weight. I felt something cold and metallic against my side, his knife. The edge of it grazed my skin. Panic surged through me, and I shoved with every ounce of strength I had left, trying to get away. I stumbled backward, but I was too slow. He slammed into me again, his body like a wall of muscle. I could feel the desperation in his movements, the frenzied way he kept trying to pin me down. His teeth were bared now, his eyes wide and unfocused, like he was lost in some kind of frenzy. I wasn't going to die here. Not like this. With a burst of adrenaline, I managed to break free. I shoved him off me and scrambled backward, my feet slipping on the tiles. My heart was racing, and I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. I scrambled toward the back door, my hands shaking as I reached for the handle. But just as I was about to turn the knob, I felt a sharp tug at my hair. He had grabbed me again, yanking me back with terrifying force. I let out a strangled cry as he dragged me away from the door. I kicked, I fought, but his grip was unyielding. I tried to bring my elbow up into his ribs, but he twisted, slamming me into the wall. "Stop! Let go!" I screamed, my voice raw. His response was a guttural growl, as if he didn't understand words, only violence. His fingers tightened around my throat. My lungs burned for air as I clawed at his hands, struggling to break free. I wasn't going to give up. With everything I had left, I kicked out with my legs, catching him in the knee. He hissed in pain, loosening his grip just enough for me to suck in a desperate breath. I shoved with all my strength and managed to break free once more. I didn't look back. I bolted for the door. The moment I stepped outside, the night air hit me like a slap to the face, but I didn't stop. I ran, barefoot and terrified, into the cold night, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps following, but I didn't dare turn around. I kept running, my body screaming in protest, until I finally reached the street. Only then did I dare look back, and that's when I saw him. He was standing in the yard, watching me, his figure silhouetted against the dim light of the porch. The knife was still in his hand, dripping with something dark. His eyes never left mine. He didn't follow. But I could see the madness in his stare. It was like he was waiting for something, like he had only paused for a moment. I ran to the neighbor's house, banging on their door until they opened it, and I screamed for help. The police came soon after. But by the time they searched my house, he was gone. They told me I was lucky, that I'd fought him off long enough to get away, but luck didn't feel like what saved me. It started as a normal Tuesday morning in Sunnyvale, a quiet town where nothing much ever happened. The sun was out, people were walking their dogs, and I was opening up my little jewelry shop, Lana's Gems. I've had the place for about 5 years now, and in that time, nothing had ever given me a reason to worry. Most of my customers were regulars, and the occasional tourist would drop by. Business was steady. Peaceful, even. But lately, there had been something strange about the neighborhood. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Every day, around noon, I would see them, groups of young men wearing hoodies, standing across the street from my shop. They didn't walk in or look at the jewelry, they just stood there, staring through the glass. It didn't seem threatening at first, just odd. I tried to brush it off. Maybe they were waiting for someone, or they were just bored. One day, around 11 a.m., a man walked into the shop. He was tall, his hoodie pulled low over his face. I didn't think much of it. I greeted him with my usual smile. "Hi, can I help you with anything today?" He didn't respond. He just wandered around the shop, running his fingers over the glass display cases, staring at the rings and necklaces without saying a word. The silence made me uncomfortable. I kept watching him from behind the counter, trying not to show my unease. I thought about calling the cops. My gut told me something was wrong, but at the same time, he hadn't done anything illegal. So I just waited, hoping he'd leave. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, he turned around and walked out the door without a word. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. But then, around 5 p.m., just as I was about to close for the day, everything changed. The door slammed open, and I barely had time to react before a group of 5 men rushed in, their faces covered by black masks, and their eyes cold and empty. They wore the same hoodies I'd seen on the others, except this time, I knew what they were here for. I froze. My heart hammered in my chest, and for a moment, I thought maybe I was dreaming. But then I heard the sound of glass breaking, sharp and violent. One of them had smashed the display case with a crowbar. The others started grabbing handfuls of jewelry, shoving necklaces and rings into large duffel bags. I could hear their breath, quick and shallow under their masks. "Don't move," one of them growled, his voice muffled through the fabric. "Just stay down." I didn't know what to do. I stood behind the counter, trembling, watching them tear my shop apart. One of the men, taller than the others, came toward me, his eyes flashing under his mask. He reached out and grabbed me by the arm, yanking me toward him. "Where's the cash?" he demanded. I don't have any cash," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. My mind was racing, trying to find a way out, but all I could think about was the sharp edge of the crowbar in one of their hands. I could hear the sound of metal scraping against glass, the clink of gold and silver being tossed into bags. He didn't believe me. Without warning, he shoved me to the ground, my head hitting the floor with a sickening thud. Stars exploded in front of my eyes, and the world seemed to spin. I tasted blood in my mouth, and when I looked up, I saw him standing over me, his hand reaching for my wrist. I gasped as he yanked my watch off my arm, and then my purse was ripped from my side. He pulled the straps so hard I thought they might snap. "You should have given us what we wanted," he spat, his voice low and menacing. I couldn't move. My body felt heavy, like I was trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I heard footsteps retreating, the sound of bags being slung over shoulders, and then, just as suddenly as they'd come, the men were gone. The room was silent. The only sound was my shallow breathing. Blood was still dripping from the cut on my forehead, and my body ached all over. I managed to sit up, my head swimming with panic and confusion. What had just happened? Was I safe? Were they really gone? I stumbled to the phone, barely able to hold it steady as I dialed 911. My voice shook as I explained what had happened. They took everything," I said, my words coming out in broken gasps. The police arrived within minutes, but by then, the damage was done. My shop was a mess. Display cases lay shattered on the floor, glass everywhere. Jewelry was gone. It felt like I'd lost everything in an instant. When the police reviewed the security footage, their faces went pale. The men had worn full masks, and there was no way to identify them. Nothing. Not even their voices were clear enough to recognize. It was like they'd planned it all perfectly. Too perfectly. They caught a few of them during a chase later that night, but none of them had anything useful to say. They refused to talk, and even after hours of interrogation, all the police got was a few grunts and vague threats. I tried to go on with my life. I tried to move past it. But the unease never left me. I started hearing noises at night, scratching at the windows, faint footsteps outside. Sometimes, when I walked into my living room, I would catch a glimpse of something moving in the corner of my eye. My breath would catch, my heart pounding, but when I looked, there was nothing there. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching me, waiting. Maybe it was the police's words that haunted me the most. "They know where you live. They're still out there."